Millionaire abandons wife for infertility, 7 years later finds her stronger, raising twins without him. Hi, my beautiful and loyal family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's family. May the Creator enfold every woman in unwavering courage, endless patience, and serenity that lingers through life's storms. May your struggles nourish the seeds of new strength, and your quiet moments blossom into anthems of hope and renewal. You are the courage in shadowed paths, the peace after the tempest, and the heart that carries love beyond measure. May your journey be gentle, your spirit unbreakable, and your soul ever bathed in light. My cherished family, let your voices rise tonight. Your faith keeps this circle strong. A like is a breath of encouragement, a comment, a flame of solidarity. This is Mission 1000 likes, for every woman who endures, believes and shines. If your heart holds compassion, like this video. If your soul moves in faith, comment, I stand with the sisters. Hi, my beloved and devoted family. Welcome to the circle of love. The pregnancy test lay in Paula Flower's trembling hand. 2 pink lines that should have filled her with joy. Instead, they filled her with dread so profound she had to grip the bathroom counter to stay upright. The ultrasound printout sat beside the sink, still warm from the clinic printer. 2 shadows, 2 heartbeats. The technician's voice echoed in her head. Congratulations, it looks like twins. We'll confirm at your next appointment, but I'm fairly certain I'm seeing 2 distinct gestational sacs. Twins. 2 babies. Double everything. Paula stared at her reflection, trying to imagine telling Mark, trying to picture his face when she showed him the ultrasound. Would he be happy? Terrified? They'd never explicitly discussed children, had always said someday, without defining when that day might arrive. Then his voice drifted up through the heating vent, and Paula's world fractured. I can't do this anymore, Dave. Mark's voice was raw, unguarded in a way it never was with her. I'm suffocating in this marriage. Every day I wake up and put on this mask of being okay, and I'm not okay. I haven't been okay in a long time. Paula sank onto the closed toilet lid, still clutching the test, unable to move or breathe. I called a lawyer today, Mark continued. Papers will be here tomorrow. I know it makes me a coward for waiting this long, but every time I looked at her face, at how much she loved our life together, I couldn't destroy that. But I'm drowning, Dave. I feel like I'm dying inside, and if I don't leave now, there won't be anything left of me. There was a pause. Paula pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from making a sound. Of course I still care about her, Mark said, his voice breaking. That's what makes this so hard. She's a good person. She deserves someone who can love this life we've built. But that person isn't me anymore. And I don't know if it ever really was. I just wish I'd been honest with myself, with her, before we got this far. Paula looked down at the pregnancy test, then at the ultrasound printout showing 2 tiny shadows that would become human beings. Her hand moved unconsciously to her flat stomach. She could tell him, right now. She could walk downstairs with this test and this photo and say, we're having twins, and watch everything change. He'd stay. She knew he would. Obligation would keep him here. Guilt would chain him to a life he clearly didn't want, and their children would grow up watching their father suffocate. They'd see it in his eyes during bedtime stories he forced himself to read. They'd feel it in hugs that came from duty instead of love. They'd learn, slowly and painfully, that they were the cage their father never wanted, but couldn't escape. Paula stood abruptly and tore the pregnancy test in half. Then quarters, then kept tearing until it was confetti in her shaking hands. She dropped the pieces in the toilet, but couldn't bring herself to flush yet. She stared at the evidence of her pregnancy floating in the water, her future dissolving into uncertainty. What was she thinking? 2 babies alone. How would she afford childcare? How would she work? The questions spiraled into panic that squeezed her chest until she couldn't breathe properly. Maybe she should tell him. Maybe obligation was better than nothing. Maybe her children deserved a father even if he was trapped and miserable. Paula fished the test pieces out of the toilet with trembling fingers, trying to fit them back together like a puzzle, as if reassembling them could reassemble her certainty. She couldn't do this alone. She wasn't strong enough. She wasn't brave enough. But the image of Mark's face, years from now, hollow with resentment, looking at their children like they were chains, made her drop the pieces back into the bowl. She flushed, watched them disappear, pulled the ultrasound photo from the counter and stared at those two tiny shadows that were counting on her to make the right choice. "I'm sorry," she whispered to them. "I'm so sorry your father doesn't know you exist, but I can't trap him. I won't let you grow up thinking you're a burden someone had to carry." She tucked the ultrasound deep into her pocket, buried the pregnancy test box in the trash, and splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection looked like a stranger, pale, terrified, but decided. The next morning happened in slow motion. Mark set divorce papers on their kitchen table with hands that shook visibly. His eyes were red-rimmed like he hadn't slept, and he kept starting to speak before stopping himself. "Paula," he finally managed, "I'm sorry. I know this seems sudden, but I can't. It's okay," Paula heard herself say, even though nothing was okay. "I understand." She didn't understand, but sitting across from him, watching him struggle to explain why their marriage was suffocating him, she knew telling him about the babies would destroy all of them. Paula pulled the papers toward her and picked up his pen. Her hand hovered over the first signature line, while her mind screamed at her to stop, to tell him to not do this alone. "You should read them first," Mark said quietly. "Have a lawyer look at them. I tried to be fair, but I don't want to drag this out." Paula signed the first page before she could change her mind, then the next, then the next. Each signature felt like cutting a rope, keeping her tethered to something solid. Mark watched her sign with an expression she couldn't read. Relief? Regret? Both? When she signed the last page, Paula stood on legs that barely held her. Morning sickness churned in her stomach. Twins meant double the hormones, double the nausea. She gripped the table edge. "I'll be gone by this afternoon," she said. "Keep everything. I don't want anything that reminds me we tried and failed." She walked upstairs before he could respond, before she could see whatever emotion might cross his face, before she broke down and told him everything. Paula packed 2 suitcases with shaking hands, clothes, photos from before they met, her grandmother's jewelry, the ultrasound printout she couldn't bear to leave behind. She left everything else, wedding album, shared memories, the life they'd pretended was working. When she carried her suitcases downstairs, Mark was standing in the living room looking at their wedding photo on the mantel. His shoulders were hunched, his face buried in his hands. "Paula, wait," his voice cracked. "Can we just talk about—" "There's nothing to talk about. You want different things. You need different things. I'm not going to fight you on that." "But what if I'm making a mistake?" The words burst out of him. "What if I'm throwing away something good because I'm scared or broken or—" "Then that's your mistake to make." Paula forced her voice to stay steady, even though she wanted to scream, "Yes, you're making a mistake. We're making a terrible mistake. I'm carrying your children and you're walking away. But you can't stay out of fear of regret. That's not fair to either of us." Mark looked at her with desperate eyes. "Do you hate me?" Paula thought about the answer, about the 2 lives growing inside her that shared his DNA, about the years ahead raising them alone, explaining why their father wasn't there without poisoning them against him. "No," she said truthfully, "I don't hate you. I'm just sad we couldn't figure out how to be happy together." She walked to her car and loaded her suitcases. Mark followed, hovering nearby like he wanted to help, but didn't know if he should. "I'm sorry," he whispered as she opened her car door. "Paula, I'm so sorry." "I know you are." She got in her car, started the engine, and allowed herself one last look at him, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I really do. She drove away, and in her rearview mirror, she watched Mark sink down onto the driveway, his head in his hands. He looked broken, lost, exactly how she felt. Paula made it 3 blocks before she had to pull over, her vision blurring with tears. She sat in a parking lot and sobbed, one hand on her stomach, apologizing over and over to the babies who couldn't hear her yet. When she finally drove to Denise's apartment, her face was swollen and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Denise took one look at her and pulled her inside. What happened? He asked for a divorce. Paula's voice sounded hollow. And I'm pregnant with twins. Oh, honey, did you tell him? No. Why not? Because he's been suffocating in our marriage, and I won't trap him with children he'd resent. Paula pulled out the ultrasound printout with trembling hands. 2 babies, Denise. How am I going to do this alone? What if I can't? What if I fail them? You won't fail them. But what if I do? What if I made the wrong choice? What if I should have told him? Then you'll deal with that when the time comes. But right now, you made the choice you thought was right. That has to be enough. Paula stared at the ultrasound, at 2 shadows that would become her entire world. It doesn't feel like enough. It feels like I'm falling off a cliff and hoping I figure out how to fly before I hit the ground. Then I'll be there to catch you, Denise promised. You're not as alone as you think. That night, Paula lay awake in Denise's guest room, one hand on her stomach, feeling the weight of the choice she'd made. She'd protected Mark from obligation. She'd protected her babies from resentment. But she'd also condemned herself to 7 years of doing everything alone, and the terror of that was suffocating. Across town, Mark sat in his empty house, staring at the divorce papers Paula had signed without hesitation. He'd expected her to fight, to yell, to demand explanations. Her immediate surrender felt wrong, like he'd missed something crucial. He walked through rooms that echoed with her absence. The kitchen where she'd made coffee every morning, the living room where they'd watched movies, the bedroom where they'd shared a life that apparently meant more to her than it had to him. Mark lay on their bed, his bed now, and felt the hollowness of the freedom he'd craved. No relief came. No sense of breathing easier, just guilt and loneliness and the terrible suspicion that he'd destroyed something precious because he'd been too cowardly to work on making it better. He slept fitfully, dreaming of Paula's face when she'd said she hoped he'd find what he was looking for. In the dream, she kept walking away, and every time he called after her, she turned back with eyes that held secrets he'd never asked about Mark, woke at dawn feeling sick with regret, but telling himself it would pass, that this was just the grief of ending something, that he'd feel better tomorrow. He was wrong. But it would be 7 years before he understood just how catastrophically wrong. 7 years carved Paula into someone unrecognizable. She built an event planning business from scratch, working until her hands cramped and her eyes burned, because stopping meant thinking about how alone she was. The twins, Alan and Paul, arrived on a winter morning that changed everything. Holding them made her feel simultaneously invincible and terrified. The years blurred into exhaustion and joy in equal measure. First steps, first words, first days of school. Paula was there for everything, fueled by determination and coffee and the fierce love that consumed her. She hired staff for her growing business, bought a modest house with a backyard, created stability from chaos. She never spoke Mark's name with bitterness to the boys. When they asked about their father, she told them a careful truth. I loved someone once who wasn't ready to be a parent. That's okay. We're okay. Alan accepted this easily. Sunny and trusting Paul asked harder questions, watched her face for lies, but eventually stopped pushing. They had each other, had their mother, had enough. Until the morning Paula walked into a downtown coffee shop with both boys, checking her schedule while they debated pastries. "Mama," Alan said suddenly, his voice strange, That man is staring at us. Paula looked up. Across the coffee shop, frozen with a sugar packet in his hand, stood Mark Wood. Their eyes met, and 7 years dissolved in a heartbeat. Chapter 2. The Coffee Shop Collision. Paula's blood turned to ice. Mark's sugar packet fell from his fingers, scattering across the counter. Neither moved. The entire coffee shop seemed to pause, sensing the collision about to happen. Alan tugged her sleeve. "Mama, why do you look scared?" She couldn't form words. Her throat had closed completely. Mark started toward them, weaving through the morning crowd like a sleepwalker, his face cycling through shock, confusion, recognition. "Paula!" Her name came out strangled when he reached them. Paul stepped in front of his mother, small but fierce. "You need to back up." Mark didn't seem to hear him, his eyes locked on the boys, moving between their faces with the desperate intensity of someone solving a puzzle. Alan had his nose, his widow's peak. Paul shared his jaw, his ear shape. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. "How old?" Mark's voice cracked on the words. "None of your business," Paula managed, grabbing both boys' hands. Her heart hammered so violently she thought she might collapse. "We need to leave." "Wait, please." Mark blocked their path instinctively, then seemed to realize what he'd done and stepped aside. But Alan, curious and unafraid, spoke up before Paula could move. "We just had our birthday. Mama threw us a party at the bowling alley with all our friends." Paula watched calculation flash across Mark's face. His lips moved silently, doing math he didn't want to accept. His knees buckled slightly. He grabbed a nearby table to steady himself. "Paula." He said her name like a prayer and an accusation. "Were you... when we... Move," Paula commanded, pulling the twins toward the exit. Her vision tunneled. She needed air, needed space, needed anywhere but here, with Mark staring at the sons he'd never known existed. "Please don't run." Mark's voice broke. "Those boys, they looked just like..." Paula spun around, keeping the twins shielded behind her. The other customers had abandoned all pretense of minding their own business. The barista stood frozen, milk pitcher steaming, forgotten. "You chose to leave," Paula said, voice low and lethal. "You don't get to demand explanations now." "I didn't know." The words exploded from Mark. "How could I know if you never told me? You want to have this conversation here, in front of them, in front of everyone?" Mark looked at Alan and Paul properly then, saw their wide eyes and confused faces, and something in him crumpled. "No, you're right. I'm sorry, I just... Paula, we need to talk. We needed to talk 7 years ago. That window closed." Paul tugged her hand urgently, his voice pitched high with stress. "Mama, who is this person? Why is he so upset?" Before Paula could answer, Alan's sharp mind pieced it together. "Is this him? Is this our father?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mark made a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. Paula felt her carefully constructed walls fracturing. "Yes," she admitted, "because lying would make this worse. This is Mark Wood. And yes, he's your biological father." "Why didn't you tell me?" Mark whispered. "Why didn't you—" "You wanted freedom." Paula cut him off sharply. "I gave it to you. Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for." She pushed past him, through the door, out into the sharp morning air that burned her lungs. The boys followed, silent now, processing. Paula loaded them into her car with shaking hands, grateful they didn't ask the questions written all over their faces. "Buckle your seatbelts," she said, her voice mechanical. "Mama, your hands are shaking," Paul observed quietly. "I know, baby. I just need a minute." She drove without destination, just needing motion, needing to be anywhere but that coffee shop. Alan broke the silence first. "So that was really our dad? The one you loved?" "Yes." "He looked really sad," Alan said carefully, "like seeing us made him sad." "Sad's one word for it," Paul muttered darkly. "Paul, he left you, Mama, before we were born. Why should we care that seeing us upset him? Paula pulled into an empty parking lot and turned to face her sons. They deserved honesty, even when honesty was complicated. Your father and I got divorced before I knew I was pregnant with you. He didn't leave because of you. He didn't know about you. He left because we weren't making each other happy anymore. But you didn't tell him, Paul pressed, his face showing that sharp intelligence he'd inherited from both of them. Why? Because I was hurt and scared. Because I thought if someone could walk away from me that easily, they didn't deserve to know about you, and because I was terrified you'd grow up feeling like mistakes he had to fix instead of gifts he wanted to celebrate. Were we mistakes? Alan asked, his voice small. No. Paula's response was fierce and immediate. You two are the best thing that ever happened to me, the only good thing to come from that marriage. You're not mistakes, you're miracles. But he didn't get to decide if he wanted us, Paul said. You took that choice away from him. The accusation stung because it was true, I did. And maybe that was wrong. But it's done now, and we all have to figure out what comes next. What does come next? Alan asked. I don't know yet, but whatever it is, we decide together, all three of us. Paul's face was set in stubborn lines. I don't want to know him. He hurt you. He made you cry. I've heard you crying at night when you think we're asleep. Paula's chest tightened. She'd thought she'd hidden that from them. And I want to meet him, Alan said quietly. Is that okay, Mama? Even though he hurt you, I still want to know him. The split between her sons was agony. Both of those feelings are okay. You're allowed to feel however you feel. What do you feel? Paul challenged. Paula thought about the question about Mark's face in the coffee shop, the shock and devastation written there. About 7 years of raising these boys alone, while their father lived his life unaware. I feel angry and scared and confused, and I feel protective of you two above everything else. Her phone started buzzing in her purse. She pulled it out to find text messages flooding in from an unknown number that somehow she knew was Mark. Please, we need to talk. I'm sorry for everything. Those boys deserve to know the truth. Don't shut me out again, please. Paula turned off her phone and dropped it in her lap. That night, after putting the boys to bed, a process that took twice as long because of their racing minds and endless questions, Paula sat with Denise and tried to process the impossible. He knows, she said numbly. Mark knows about them. What are you going to do? I have no idea. Alan wants to meet him. Paul wants nothing to do with him, and I'm caught in the middle trying to figure out how to protect everyone while the ground shifts under my feet. You can't protect them from their own father forever. Watch me. Paula. No, Denise. You didn't see his face, the shock, the accusation, like I'd committed some crime by not telling him, but he's the one who walked away. He's the one who wanted freedom. I didn't owe him anything. Maybe not, but those boys deserve a chance to know him. What if he disappoints them? What if he's wonderful for 6 months, then gets bored and leaves? What if they love him and he breaks their hearts the way he broke mine? What if he doesn't? Denise countered gently. What if he's actually a good father? Paula's phone, now powered back on, buzzed constantly on the table between them. Mark wasn't giving up. Read them, Denise suggested. I don't want to. Read them anyway. Paula picked up her phone. The messages had evolved from desperate to careful to heartbreaking. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a conversation. I saw them, Paula. I saw our sons, and I can't unsee them. I've spent 7 years thinking I made the right choice, leaving I was wrong, so completely, devastatingly wrong. Please, just tell me what I have to do. I'll do anything. Paula set down her phone, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. He says he'll do anything. Then make him prove it, Denise said simply. Make him work for it. Make him show he's not the man who walked away 7 years ago. And if he can't, then you'll deal with that. but you have to give him the chance to try. For Alan's sake, and maybe for yours." Paula looked at her phone, at the desperate messages from a man who'd finally realized what he'd lost. Part of her wanted to watch him suffer the way she'd suffered. Another part, the part that remembered loving him once, wanted to believe people could change. "I'll think about it," she finally said. "But Denise, if he hurts my boys, I'll destroy him. I don't care how much time has passed or how sorry he claims to be." "I know," Denise said, "and he should be terrified of that. Mama bears are the most dangerous creatures alive." Paula smiled grimly. Mark Wood was about to learn exactly how dangerous she could be. Chapter 3. The Fortress She Built. 3 weeks of siege warfare followed. Mark tried every approach. He appeared at Paula's office building, only to be turned away by Rita, her assistant, who'd taken one look at his desperate face and informed him that Ms. Flower's calendar was fully booked indefinitely. When Mark tried to argue, Rita simply picked up her desk phone and asked if he'd prefer she call building security or city police. He called Paula's cell 17 times the first day alone. She listened to his voice breaking over voicemail. "Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Before blocking his number, he started calling from different numbers. She recognized the desperation in his breathing and hung up before he could speak. He waited outside her office at closing time. Paula left through the parking garage, security badge already swiping her through the exit gate before Mark realized she'd slipped past him. By the time he reached the street, her taillights were disappearing around the corner. Flowers arrived at her office. Rita returned them. Letters came. Paula threw them away unopened, though her hands shook slightly with each one. But inside Paula's fortress, fractures were spreading. Alan asked about Mark every night at dinner. "Can we see him again? Just once? I want to talk to him." "Your father forfeited his right to access when he walked away," Paula said, harsher than she meant to. "But he didn't know about us," Alan pressed. "How was he supposed to care about kids he didn't know existed?" "He should have stayed with Mama in the first place," Paul shot back. "Then he would have known." "Boys!" "Maybe Mama should have told him," Alan exploded, shocking them all into silence. His face immediately crumpled. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. I'm sorry, Mama." Paula felt like she'd been struck. Alan was right, and hearing the truth from her own son hurt more than any of Mark's messages. "No, sweetheart, you're right." She pulled Alan close, feeling him shake against her. "I made a choice that affected all of us, and now we're all living with the consequences." "I don't want him in our lives," Paul said stubbornly. "We're fine without him. We've always been fine." "What if we could be better?" Alan whispered into Paula's shoulder. The question haunted Paula through the night. Better? Could they be better with Mark in their lives? Or would he just find new ways to disappoint them? When Denise came over after the boys were asleep, she found Paula in the dark living room, staring at nothing. Still building walls. "I'm maintaining necessary boundaries." "Honey, there's a difference between boundaries and prisons. You've locked all of you inside." Paula's jaw tightened. "He doesn't get to waltz back in because he finally discovered the truth. He destroyed me, Denise. I won't let him destroy them." "What if he's changed?" "People don't change. Not really. They just get better at hiding who they are. That's fear talking, not truth. Fear has kept us safe for 7 years. Safe isn't the same as whole," Denise said gently. "Alan needs his father. Even Paul's anger is just fear wearing a mask. They deserve the chance to know Mark, and you deserve the chance to be free from carrying this alone." "I'm not alone, I have them. I have you. You have people who love you, but you're still alone with this choice you made 7 years ago, and it's eating you alive." Paula's eyes burned. What if I let him in and he hurts them? What if he's wonderful for a while, then gets bored and leaves? What if they love him and he breaks their hearts? Then you'll be there to help them heal, the same way you healed yourself. "I didn't heal. I just learned to live with the broken pieces." "Exactly, you survived, and they will too, if it comes to that." But Paula, what if it doesn't? What if he's actually a good father? Then I lose them, Paula whispered. Don't you see? If he's everything I couldn't be alone, stable, fun, financially secure, they'll choose him, and I'll be the villain who kept them apart. Or you'll be their mother who loved them enough to be brave when it terrified you. The next morning, Paula found an envelope slipped under her front door, hand-delivered, Mark's writing on the front. She stood in her entryway holding it, knowing it was different from the others, but not sure why she opened it in her kitchen, coffee untouched beside her. Paula, I won't defend what I did 7 years ago. I walked away from our marriage because I was selfish and scared and convinced that freedom meant more than love. I was wrong about everything. But I need you to understand something. I didn't walk away easily. I walked away thinking it would kill me, and discovering I could survive without you felt worse than dying would have. For 7 years I've lived half a life, telling myself I made the right choice, building a career that means nothing when I come home to silence. Then I saw them, our sons, Alan and Paul, and in one moment 7 years of lies I'd told myself shattered. I'm not asking to replace you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for one conversation. Just you and me. No lawyers, no anger, just truth. There's a coffee shop on Riverside Avenue called Morning Grounds. I'll be there every morning at 8 for the next week. If you come, I'll answer any question you ask. If you don't, I'll stop. I'll disappear and never contact you again. The choice is yours, Paula. It always should have been. Mark. Paula read it 3 times. The words felt different, not manipulative, just tired and honest. She thought about burning it, about maintaining her walls, about protecting everyone by shutting Mark out completely. Then she heard Alan's voice. What if we could be better? That evening, Paula sat the twins down at the kitchen table, her heart hammering. Your father has been trying to contact me, and I've been refusing to talk to him. Why? Alan asked immediately. Because I'm terrified of him hurting you, of him hurting me again, of everything changing when I've worked so hard to make things stable. What changed? Paul asked suspiciously. You did. Both of you. Alan, you asked if we could be better with him. Paul, you're carrying anger that isn't yours to carry. You're protecting me from someone you've never met, and I realized I'm making decisions out of fear instead of love. What does that mean? Alan pressed. It means I'm going to meet with your father, just the 2 of us, to talk, and after that conversation, we'll figure out together, all 3 of us, what happens next. Paul's face paled. You're going to let him back in. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I promise you this. Whatever I decide, it'll be because it's best for you 2, not for me, not for him, for you. Alan threw his arms around her neck. Thank you, Mama. Paul sat rigid, his jaw clenched in that way that was so painfully Mark. But eventually he nodded once. Not acceptance, but not refusal either. The next morning, Paula stood outside Morning Grounds at 8 o'clock, her heart trying to escape her chest. Through the window, she could see Mark at a corner table, staring into his coffee like it held answers to impossible questions. She could leave, turn around, keep her fortress intact. Instead, Paula pushed open the door and walked toward the man who'd broken her heart, carrying 7 years of questions she'd been too afraid to ask. Chapter 4. The Meeting. She controlled Mark's head snapped up when the bell chimed. The hope that flooded his face when he saw Paula was almost painful to witness. He started to rise, reconsidered, half stood anyway in an awkward motion that betrayed his nerves. Paula didn't sit immediately. She stood beside the empty chair, purse clutched in front of her like armor. I'm here. You have 30 minutes. Use them wisely. Thank you for coming. Can I get you? I don't want coffee. I want answers. Paula's voice was ice. Start with why you destroyed our marriage. Mark winced but nodded. Please sit. Please. Paula perched on the edge of the chair, coat still on, purse in her lap. Everything about her posture screamed temporary, ready to bolt. "I'm going to tell you the truth," Mark began, his voice rough. "Not the sanitized version that makes me look better, the actual truth, and it's ugly. I'm listening. I married you because I loved you desperately. That part was real. But somewhere around our 3rd anniversary, I started feeling trapped. Not by you, by the weight of being an adult, bills and mortgages and routines. I'd lie awake at night feeling like I was suffocating, and I blamed the marriage instead of recognizing I was just scared of commitment and responsibility." Paula's hands tightened on her purse, but she remained silent. "I convinced myself I'd made a mistake marrying you, that life was happening somewhere else, to people who weren't tied down. I started staying late at work not because I needed to, but because coming home meant facing the life I'd built and resented, and that resentment poisoned everything." "So you ran," Paula said flatly. "I ran, like a coward. I told myself I was being honest, finally admitting we weren't happy. But Paula, you were happy. I saw it in your face every time I walked through the door. And I destroyed that because I was too weak to say, 'I'm struggling, I need help, let's work on this together.' You said you were suffocating, that you felt like you were dying inside." Mark's eyes filled with tears. "I did feel that way, but I realize now I wasn't suffocating in our marriage, I was suffocating in my own fear and immaturity. I could have talked to you, could have suggested counseling, could have been honest about my struggles instead of checking out emotionally and blaming you for problems I created." Paula felt something crack in her chest. "You let me think I wasn't enough, that I'd failed somehow. I know, and that's unforgivable. You were more than enough, Paula. You were extraordinary. I was just too broken to see it. Stop trying to make me feel better about what you did. I don't need platitudes. That's not what I'm doing. I'm telling you the truth you deserve to hear. You didn't fail. I failed. Completely and catastrophically." Paula leaned forward, her voice sharp with 7 years of suppressed rage. "Do you want to know what happened the day you asked for the divorce?" "Yes. I came home early to surprise you. I'd just found out I was pregnant with twins, Mark. 2 babies. I had the ultrasound printout in my purse and a reservation at Lombardi's. I was going to tell you over dinner." The color drained from Mark's face. "Paula. Then I heard you on the phone. Heard you tell someone you'd been dying in our marriage, that you'd called a lawyer, that you needed to leave before there was nothing left of you. And right then, with that ultrasound in my hand, I decided you didn't deserve to know." "Why?" Mark's voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I heard how much pain you were in, how desperately you needed out. And I knew if I told you about the babies, you'd stay out of obligation. You'd resent me for trapping you, and eventually you'd resent them for being the cage you couldn't escape." Mark buried his face in his hands. "You should have told me anyway. Let me make that choice." "Should I?" Paula's voice rose. "So you could stay and slowly die inside while our children watched? So they could grow up feeling like mistakes that ruined your life? No, thank you. I chose to let you go and raise them alone. That was my decision to make." "It should have been our decision. They're my children too." "Biology doesn't make you a father, Mark. Being there makes you a father. And you were never there because you never knew they existed, because I chose not to tell you." Paula stood abruptly, "And I'd make the same choice again. My only regret is not seeing your face when you realized what you lost." She started for the door, but Mark stood too, his voice desperate. "Wait, please. You're right to be angry. You're right about all of it. But Paula, those boys exist. And they deserve better than us, fighting about decisions we can't change." Paula spun to face him. "Don't you dare lecture me about what they deserve. I've given them everything for 7 years. Where were you? Living a hollow life and calling it freedom." Mark's voice cracked, coming home to empty apartments, building a career that means nothing when there's no one to share it with. lying to myself that I'd made the right choice until I saw our sons and realized I'd made the worst mistake of my life. Your regret doesn't obligate me to anything. I know, but Paula, I'm not the man who walked away. Or maybe I am, and I'm finally adult enough to recognize how catastrophically I failed. I can't undo the past, but I'm begging you for a chance at a different future. Why should I trust you? Why should they? You shouldn't. Trust has to be earned, and I haven't earned anything, but let me try. Let me show up. Let me prove I'm not going to disappear the moment fatherhood gets hard. Paula wrapped her arms around herself. I need to think. Take all the time you need. If I agree to this, if it happens on my terms, slowly, carefully, and the second you disappoint them, the second you give me any reason to think you'll hurt them, it's over, permanently. I understand. Do you really? Do you understand that Paul already hates you for hurting me? That Alan wants to meet you so badly he's questioning every choice I've made? That letting you into their lives could destroy the stability I've worked 7 years to build? I understand the risk, and I'm asking you to take it anyway. Mark's voice was raw. Not for me, for them. They deserve to know their father, even if their father is a man still learning how to deserve them. Paula studied his face, searching for the selfish man who'd left her. But all she saw was desperation and genuine remorse and something that looked like growth. One meeting, she finally said. Supervised. 1 hour at the park, I'll be there the entire time. And Mark, if you show up late, if you treat this casually, if you hurt them in any way, you'll never see them again. I'll be there. This doesn't mean I forgive you. This means I'm putting my son's needs ahead of my anger. Don't confuse the two. I won't. Paula walked to the door, then paused without turning around. Mark, for what it's worth, I believe you're sorry. I just don't know if sorry is enough to fix what you broke. She left him standing in the coffee shop, and this time when she drove away, her hands were steady and her eyes were dry. She'd made her choice. Now they'd all live with the consequences. Chapter 5. The Boys Who Asked Questions. Paula spent an entire evening preparing for a conversation she dreaded more than facing Mark himself. She wrote note cards, threw them away, paced her kitchen until Denise physically made her sit down at the table where Alan and Paul waited with worried faces. I met with your father this morning, Paula said without preamble. Both boys froze. Alan's face lit up. Paul's darkened. And, Paul asked carefully, he wants to meet you, properly, not the accidental way at the coffee shop. When can we go? Alan asked immediately, practically bouncing in his seat. Hold on, we need to discuss this first, all three of us together before any decisions get made. What's there to discuss? Paul said, his voice cold in a way that made him sound far older than his years. He's our father, supposedly, and now he wants to play daddy because he accidentally saw us. How convenient. Paul! No, Mama, I need to say this. Paul stood, his small body vibrating with intensity. Where was he when you were pregnant? When we were born? When Alan broke his wrist falling off his bike and you couldn't leave his bedside for 2 days? When I had nightmares about monsters and you sang to me until I fell asleep? Where was he for any of that? He didn't know about you, Paula said gently, though the words tasted like ash. Because you didn't tell him why. What did he do that was so terrible you couldn't even tell him you were having his children? The question hung between them, demanding an answer Paula had hoped to avoid giving. He asked for a divorce the same day I found out I was pregnant with you both. Paula took a shaky breath. And instead of telling him and watching him stay out of obligation, I chose to let him go. I chose to protect you from growing up with a father who resented you. That wasn't your choice to make, Paul's voice cracked. You took away his right to decide. You took away our right to have a father. Alan was crying silently, tears streaming down his face. Why would you do that, Mama? Paula felt her heart break cleanly in two, Because I loved you both before you were born. Because I heard your father tell someone he was dying in our marriage that he needed to escape. And I wouldn't trap him with children he never chose. I thought I was protecting you. From what? Paul demanded. From feeling unwanted. From watching your father suffocate under the weight of obligations he never asked for. From growing up knowing you were the cage he couldn't escape. Maybe he would have loved us, Alan whispered. Maybe if you'd told him, everything would have been different. Maybe. Or maybe he would have stayed and grown to hate all of us. I made a choice with imperfect information and impossible circumstances. It might have been the wrong choice, but it was the one I could live with. Paul sank back into his chair, anger deflating into something sadder. I don't know if I can forgive you for that. I know, and that's okay. You're allowed to be angry at me. Paula reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. But I need you to understand, everything I did because I loved you. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it true. I want to meet him, Alan said through his tears. Even if he messed up, even if you messed up, I still want to know him. Is that okay? Of course it's okay, sweetheart. I'll go too, Paul said reluctantly. Not for me, for Alan. Because if our father hurts him, I want to be there. Paula pulled both boys into a fierce hug, holding them while they cried for complications they were too young to fully understand but old enough to feel. We'll do this slowly, she promised. 1 hour at the park. I'll be there the whole time. And if anything feels wrong, we stop. No questions asked. The week leading up to the park meeting stretched like taffy. Alan asked constant questions about Mark. What did he like? What did he do? Did he play sports? Did he like music? Questions Paula struggled to answer because she wasn't sure anymore who Mark had become. Paul grew quieter, spending hours in his room drawing elaborate spacecraft, building worlds where families were simple and fathers never left. Paula would find him staring at nothing, his young face carrying burdens he shouldn't have to bear. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Alan changed his shirt 3 times, wanting to look good for a father who'd never seen him. Paul wore his regular clothes and refused to acknowledge anything special about the day they drove to Riverside Park in heavy silence. Mark was already there, standing under a massive oak tree, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. He looked as terrified as Paula felt. That's him, Paula said unnecessarily. He looks normal, Alan observed. I thought he'd look more, I don't know, different. You look exactly like him, Paula said softly. You just can't see it because you've never known anything else. They approached slowly. Mark straightened when he saw them, his face cycling through joy and terror so rapidly, Paula almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Hi, Mark said when they reached him, his voice unsteady. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me this chance. Hi, Alan said immediately. Paul remained silent. An awkward pause stretched uncomfortably. Mark looked at Paula desperately, clearly having no idea how to begin. She almost helped him, then remembered this needed to be hard. He had to earn this. There's a duck pond, Paula finally suggested. The boys enjoy feeding them. I brought food, Mark said quickly, pulling a bag from his pocket. I researched online. Regular bread isn't good for ducks, so I got special feed from the pet store. Alan's face brightened. You researched duck food? I researched a lot of things I wanted to... Mark stopped, swallowed hard. I didn't want to mess this up more than I already have. They walked toward the pond, a cluster of 4 people trying to figure out how to exist in the same space. Paula hung back slightly, watching Mark with her sons, with the vigilance of a mother bear ready to strike. Mark tried too hard at first. His voice was too bright, his questions too rapid fire. His smile forced Alan answered politely, but grew quieter as Mark's nervous energy filled all available space. Paul ignored him completely, throwing duck food with methodical precision. Then Mark noticed the drawing safety pinned to Paul's backpack, an intricate spaceship design showing real understanding of aerodynamics. "Did you draw that?" Mark asked, his voice more natural than it had been. Paul glanced at him with suspicion. "Yeah, it's really impressive. The propulsion system looks well thought out. The way you've angled the thrusters for maximum efficiency shows genuine engineering intuition." Paul's eyes narrowed. "How would you know?" "I used to work on aircraft components. Mark stopped, glancing at Paula. "Before I made some bad career choices, but I loved the engineering side of flight. It's similar to spacecraft design. Same physics, different environment." For the first time, Paul looked genuinely interested. "I've been trying to figure out realistic heat distribution, but I can't make the math work. Heat distribution is tricky. Can I see your drawings?" Paul hesitated, then pulled a worn notebook from his backpack. "I guess." Mark knelt beside Paul, examining the drawings with serious attention, treating them like professional blueprints instead of a child's sketches. "These are extraordinary. This one here, you've actually solved a problem with wing stress that real engineers struggled with. How did you figure this out?" "Just made sense to me. That's called intuition, and it's rare. You've got a gift for this, Paul." Something in Paul's face softened. Mark pulled out his phone and showed images of aircraft he'd worked on, explaining challenges and solutions in language Paul could understand. Alan wandered over, drawn by his brother's rare enthusiasm, and soon both boys were peppering Mark with questions. Paula watched from a bench, her heart doing complicated acrobatics. This was what she'd feared, watching them connect with him, watching him be good with them, watching the possibility of losing them become real. The hour passed faster than she expected. When Paula called time, Alan actually groaned. "Can we see him again?" Alan asked as they walked back to the car. "We'll see." "That means yes," Alan crowed. Paul was quieter, but he clutched his notebook close, and Paula noticed he'd let Mark write his phone number inside with a note. "Call if you want to talk about spacecraft or anything else. Dad." The word Dad made Paula's stomach twist. That night she overheard the boys talking in their room when they should have been sleeping. "He wasn't terrible," Paul admitted grudgingly. "He was nice, and he knew about spaceships." "Knowing about spaceships doesn't erase what he did to Mama." "Maybe he's changed, though people can change, right?" "Maybe," Paul said doubtfully. "But I'm going to watch him. If he hurts her again or hurts us." "What will you do?" Alan challenged. "I don't know yet. But something." Paula leaned against the wall outside their room, tears streaming down her face. Her boys were navigating impossible waters she'd poured for them, and she wasn't sure anymore if she'd saved them or damaged them beyond repair. Chapter 6. The Truth. Paul uncovered 3 visits became 4, then 5. Mark showed up consistently, never late, never cancelling, always prepared with thoughtful activities. He brought Alan a vintage guitar pick from a musician he'd met at a conference. He brought Paul a university-level aerospace engineering textbook marked with pages he thought Paul would find interesting. Paula remained vigilant, watching for signs of waning interest, waiting for the inevitable disappointment. But weeks passed, and Mark kept appearing. Then Paula came home from work early one afternoon to find Paul in her home office, surrounded by papers from her file cabinet, tears streaking his face. "Paul, what are you doing in here?" Her son looked up, clutching divorce papers in his trembling hands. "Why did you give him everything?" Paula's stomach dropped. "How did you get those? That cabinet is locked." "I picked it with a paperclip. YouTube taught me." Paul's voice shook with emotion. "Mama, these papers say you gave up the house, your rights to anything he owned. You asked for nothing. Why would you do that?" Paula sank into her office chair, the weight of her past crushing down. Those are private documents, Paul. Adult matters you shouldn't be reading. I can read fine. I understand numbers. It says here you could have gotten support payments. It says if he remarried within a certain time frame, you'd get money. Did he remarry? No. So you got nothing. You raised us completely alone. And I remember... Paul's voice cracked. I remember you crying at the kitchen table late at night, going through bills. I remember you saying we couldn't afford things, and the whole time you could have made him help you. Paul, it's more complicated than... Stop saying that! Paul shouted, his control shattering. Stop protecting him. He left you pregnant and alone, and you still gave him everything. Why? Paula pulled her son onto her lap, even though he was getting too big for it, holding him while he cried angry, confused tears that soaked through her shirt. Because I was hurt and proud and stupid, she said quietly. Because I wanted a clean break. Because I thought if I took his money, I'd be tied to him forever, and I needed to be free of him completely. But you had us. You needed help. I needed my dignity more. And yes, maybe that was selfish. Maybe I should have swallowed my pride and taken what I was entitled to for your sake. But I didn't want anything from him, Paul. Not his money, not his guilt, not his obligation, just freedom. Paul pulled back to look at her. You're the strongest person I know, Mama. But that doesn't mean you should have had to be strong alone. I wasn't alone. I had you and Alan. We were babies. We needed you, but you needed help too. Paul's face crumpled again. I wish you'd asked for help. I wish you'd made him pay for what he did. Revenge wouldn't have made our lives better, it would have just kept me angry. And I was already so angry, Paul. I needed to let it go to survive. Are you still angry? Paula thought about the question. Sometimes, but mostly I'm just tired of carrying it. Do you still love him? The question pierced straight through her defenses. Why do you keep asking me that? Because you look at him sometimes when he's with us, and your face gets soft, like you're remembering something that didn't hurt yet. Paula's throat closed. What I feel about your father is complicated, but it doesn't matter because it does matter, Paul interrupted. If you still love him, maybe you can forgive him. And if you can forgive him, maybe this whole mess can turn into something good. Life isn't a fairy tale, baby. Sometimes broken things stay broken. But you taught me that making things right is harder than not breaking them in the first place, remember? When I broke Alan's toy and felt terrible, you said fixing things shows more character than never breaking them. Paula laughed through sudden tears. I can't believe you're using my own wisdom against me. I learned from the best. That evening, Denise came over to help Paula process the afternoon's events. He found the divorce papers, Paula said, still shaken. He knows I took nothing. What did you tell him? The truth. That I chose freedom over money, dignity over revenge. How'd he take it? Better than I feared, worse than I hoped. He's trying to understand why I made the choices I made. They both are, and I don't have good answers anymore. What are your feelings about Mark now? Denise asked gently. Real talk, no deflection. Paula was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I don't know. I've been so angry for so long I forgot how to feel anything else. But watching him with the boys, seeing how hard he's trying, it's confusing. He's not the man who left me. Or maybe he is, and I'm just seeing a side of him I never knew existed. Do you still love him? That's what Paul asked. I'm not Paul. I'm your best friend who's watched you build walls around your heart for 7 years. So I'm asking again. Do you still love him? Paula's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Because if I admit I still love him, then I have to face the possibility of being hurt again. And I can't survive being hurt like that again, Denise. I barely survived the first time. The next Saturday, during their park visit, Paul brought up the divorce papers directly, shocking everyone. I found Mama's divorce papers, Paul announced while they sat on a bench eating ice cream. Alan's eyes went wide. Mark froze, his cone halfway to his mouth. "Paul," Paula started. "No, Mama, he needs to know what you sacrificed." Paul turned to Mark, his young face fierce. "She gave up everything, the house, money, support payments, everything. She could have made you pay for abandoning her, but she didn't. She just walked away and started over with nothing except us." Mark's face had gone ashen. "Paula, and she never once said anything bad about you to us," Paul continued relentlessly. "Not once. Even when we asked why we didn't have a father like other kids, even when things were hard, she protected you. Can you say the same about her?" The accusation hung in the air. Mark set down his ice cream, his hand shaking. "No," he said quietly. "I can't, because I never talked about your mother at all. I buried the memory of her because facing what I'd done hurt too much, which means I was selfish even in my regret." "At least you admit it," Paul said. "Paul, sweetheart, this isn't productive." Paula tried again. "Someone needs to say it. Someone needs to make sure he understands what he's asking from us. He wants to be our dad, but showing up for a few weeks doesn't erase 7 years of nothing." Mark nodded slowly, accepting the hit. "You're right, Paul, it doesn't. And maybe nothing I do will ever be enough. But I'm going to try anyway. Not because I think I can earn forgiveness, but because you deserve a father who shows up, who admits when he's wrong, who puts your needs ahead of his comfort." "Those are just words," Paul said skeptically. "Then watch my actions. Judge me on what I do, not what I say." Alan, who'd been quiet through the exchange, finally spoke. "I think we should give him a real chance, Paul, not just supervise visits. A real chance." "Why?" Paul demanded. "Because Mama did. She brought us here even though it terrified her. And Mama's the smartest, bravest person I know. If she thinks there's hope, maybe there is." Paul looked at his mother. "Is there hope?" Paula met Mark's eyes across the boys, seeing desperation and determination, and something that looked almost like love. Not for her, or not just for her, but for the possibility of redemption. "I think people can surprise you," Paula said carefully. "They can grow and become better than they were. Whether your father does that, whether he earns the right to be in your lives, we have to wait and see." "That's not a real answer," Paul muttered. "It's the most honest one I have." Mark's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it, silenced it without reading. "That's the 4th call you've ignored," Paula observed. "Work. It can wait. This matters more." Something in Paula's chest shifted at those words. The Mark she'd known would have answered every call, every text, prioritizing career over everything. This Mark was different, or trying to be. When they parted that afternoon, Paula felt lighter somehow. Truth had been spoken, pain had been acknowledged, and somewhere in the mess of it all, healing had maybe finally, genuinely begun. Chapter 7. The Apology That Wasn't Enough. Mark started therapy on a Wednesday afternoon, sitting across from Dr. Hartley, a woman with perceptive eyes who made him uncomfortable in the way only truth-tellers could. "Tell me why you're here," she said without preamble. "I abandoned my wife 7 years ago. She was pregnant with twins, but I didn't know now those children exist, and I'm trying to piece together something from wreckage I created." "That's a recitation of events. Why are you in my office?" Mark shifted in his seat. "Because I need to be better. For them. And for yourself." The question lodged uncomfortably in his chest. Over the following weeks, Dr. Hartley pulled apart his motivations like a master mechanic diagnosing a failing engine. She made him examine why he'd run, what he'd been running from, and, most painfully, whether he was capable of staying when life inevitably got hard again. "You felt trapped," Dr. Hartley noted during their 5th session. "By what exactly?" "Adulthood, responsibility, the mundane weight of an ordinary life." "So you destroyed your marriage because you were afraid of being average?" Mark flinched. That sounds pathetic. It sounds human, but most people don't blow up their lives because they're scared of routine. What made you different? I don't know. Yes, you do. Think harder. Mark sat with the question, letting it turn over in his mind until something painful surfaced. I watched my father work 60 hours a week for 40 years. He was miserable but stayed because that's what you did. When he retired, he lasted 3 months before dying of a heart attack. I spent my whole life terrified I'd become him, trapped in a life that killed me slowly. So you ran before you could be trapped? Yes. Even though Paula wasn't your father, and your marriage wasn't his job, and you had choices he didn't. I didn't see that then. I just saw the trap closing. And now I see I traded one cage for another. I built a successful career, but come home to nothing. I'm free, but completely alone. Turns out the trap wasn't marriage. It was fear. That realization changed something fundamental. Mark left therapy and went home to write. Not an email or text, but a real letter on actual paper, because words this important deserved permanence. He wrote for hours, filling pages with truths he'd never said aloud. He wrote about the specific ways he'd failed Paula, about checking out of their marriage while she kept trying, about letting fear poison what they'd built, about the company she'd helped him start in their early years, her ideas, her belief in him, her unpaid labor that had made his success possible. When he finished, dawn was breaking. His hand ached from writing. He had 23 pages of confession, but confession wasn't enough. The next morning, Mark called his accountant and lawyer. By afternoon, he'd drawn up papers to give Paula half the value of his company from their divorce date forward. It wouldn't undo what he'd done, but it would acknowledge that her contributions mattered, that his success wasn't built in a vacuum. He put everything in an envelope and hand-delivered it to Paula's office. Rita eyed him with deep suspicion. Ms. Flower made it clear she doesn't want to see you. I know. Just please give her this. She doesn't need to respond. I just need her to read it. Rita took the envelope like it might contain explosives. If this upsets her, you'll answer to me. That's fair. Paula read the letter that night after the boys were asleep. She sat at her kitchen table with cold tea and read Mark's confession. By page 5, she was crying. By page 15, she was furious. By the end, she was shaking. The financial documents made her rage flare white-hot. She grabbed her phone and called before she could stop herself. Mark answered on the first ring. Paula? What is this? What the hell is this? It's what I should have done when we divorced. Recognition that, you think money fixes this? Her voice shook with fury. You think a check makes you their father, makes you someone worthy of forgiveness? No, I don't. They needed you at 3 in the morning when they had fevers that wouldn't break and I was terrified. They needed you when Alan broke his arm and I held him while he screamed in pain because the hospital was overwhelmed and we had to wait. They needed you when Paul asked why he didn't have a daddy and I had to invent answers that wouldn't break his heart. Where was your checkbook then? You're right. Your sorry means nothing. Sorry doesn't give them back what you took. Sorry doesn't erase missed birthdays and school plays and bedtime stories. Sorry is just a word people say when they finally realize what they lost and want to feel better about losing it. I know, Mark said quietly. God, Paula, I know. I'm not trying to buy forgiveness. I'm trying to acknowledge that my success was built partly on your foundation, and you deserved compensation for that. This isn't about the boys. It's about debts owed to you. I don't want your money. I never wanted your money. I wanted a partner who wouldn't abandon me when life got hard. I know, and I failed at that completely. But I can't go back and be that partner. All I can do is try to be someone better now. Paula was crying, angry tears that wouldn't stop. I hate you for what you took from us. I hate myself too, every single day. There was a long silence. Paula could hear Mark's ragged breathing on the other end. The boys asked if they could spend a whole day with you, Paula finally said. Unsupervised. Alan suggested it. Paul agreed. And I'm terrified to say yes, because what if you let them down? I won't. You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that. You're right. But Paula, I'm asking you to trust me anyway. Not because I've earned it, but because they need to see if I'm capable of being their father, and the only way they'll know is if you give me the chance to prove it. Paula's grip on the phone tightened. One day, all day, but I'm checking in multiple times. And Mark, if you disappoint them, if you let them down in any way, I will end this permanently. I understand. I don't think you do, but you're about to find out what happens when you betray Mama Bear's trust twice. Paula hung up without saying goodbye. She sat in her dark kitchen, staring at Mark's letter spread across her table, at financial documents that meant nothing compared to what she'd lost. Denise arrived an hour later, let herself in with her spare key when she saw Paula's light still on. I can feel your chaos from down the street. What happened? Paula gestured at the papers. Mark wrote me a 23-page confession and offered me half his company's worth from our divorce forward. Denise picked up the letter, scanning pages. This is actually pretty honest. Honesty doesn't fix anything. No, but it's a start. Denise set down the letter. Are you going to let him take the boys for a full day? I already said yes against every instinct screaming at me to protect them. Why'd you say yes then? Because Alan looked at me with such hope. Because Paul needs to see for himself whether Mark is worth knowing, because I'm exhausted from making every decision alone. Paula's voice broke. And maybe because some small, stupid part of me wants to believe he's really changed. That's not stupid, that's hopeful. There's a difference. That Saturday, when Mark arrived to pick up the boys, he looked at Paula with something like awe. Thank you for trusting me with them. I don't trust you, but I trust them. Don't make me regret this. I won't. I swear I won't. Paula watched them drive away, Alan waving enthusiastically from the back seat, Paul sitting rigid but present, and felt her heart try to follow them. She'd just handed her entire world to the man who'd destroyed it once before. All she could do now was wait and pray she hadn't made a catastrophic mistake. Chapter 8. The Day That Changed. Mark picked up Alan and Paul at 9 in the morning, both boys carrying backpacks like they were preparing for an expedition. Alan vibrated with excitement. Paul looked cautiously hopeful, which felt like progress. What's the plan? Alan asked, already bouncing in his seat before Mark even started the car. Science Museum. They have a new aerospace exhibit with flight simulators. Paul's eyes lit up, despite his usual guardedness. The one with the jet cockpit replica? That's the one. Thought you might want to check it out. The drive was easier than Mark expected. Alan filled silences with chatter about his music class, his best friend's upcoming birthday, a movie he wanted to see. Paul was quieter, but occasionally added observations that showed he was engaged, present, not just tolerating the day. Mark felt like he was walking on glass. One wrong move, and everything would shatter. The museum was crowded with families. Mark experienced a surge of unexpected pride walking in with his sons. His sons. The words still felt surreal, too good to be true. They spent nearly 3 hours in the aerospace section. Paul's knowledge impressed the museum guides, who kept pulling Mark aside to comment on his brilliant son. Each time, Mark felt a complicated mixture of pride and grief. Pride in who Paul had become. Grief that he'd missed watching him become it. Alan gravitated toward the music exhibit, trying every instrument the staff would allow. He had natural rhythm, Mark noticed, could pick up melodies by ear. Where did that come from, Mark wondered, then realized with a pang it must be from Paula. She'd hummed constantly when they were married, always had music playing. At lunch in the museum cafe, Mark had come prepared. He'd remembered both boys' food preferences from Paula's careful notes, had packed backup snacks in case the cafe options didn't work. Can I ask you something? Alan said around a bite of pasta. Anything. Mama said you used to play guitar. Why'd you stop? The question caught Mark off guard. She remembered that? She remembers everything about you, Paul said quietly, his eyes sharp. Even the stuff that hurt. Mark absorbed that observation, feeling its weight. I stopped because I convinced myself adults didn't have time for hobbies. That music was a distraction from building something important, so I sold my guitar and focused on work. That's really sad, Alan said with the brutal honesty of children. Music makes people happy. Why would you give up being happy? The innocent question hit harder than any of Paula's accusations. I thought success would make me happy instead. I was wrong about everything. You could start again, Alan suggested. My teacher says people can learn anything if they want it enough. Maybe I will. Paul had been silent through this exchange, pushing his sandwich around his plate. Now he looked up with serious eyes. Mama gave up things too, for us. What did she give up? Mark asked gently. Photography. She had all these cameras and photo albums, beautiful pictures of everything, buildings, people, light through windows, but she sold them to pay for our preschool, told us they were collecting dust, but I saw her face when the buyer came to pick them up. She cried after he left. Mark's chest constricted painfully. I didn't know she was into photography. There's a lot you don't know, Paul said without malice, just truth. Will you help me understand? Help me learn what I missed? Paul considered this with the gravity of someone much older. Maybe, but you have to earn it. That's more than fair. After lunch, they tried the flight simulator. Alan went first, crashing spectacularly and laughing the entire time. Paul took it seriously, face intense with concentration, and managed to execute a perfect landing sequence that impressed the operator. Ever thought about becoming a pilot? Mark asked as they left the simulator. I want to design the ships, not fly them, Paul said firmly. Someone has to make sure they don't fall apart. Smart thinking. I know. Mark laughed at the confidence in Paul's voice. Pure Paula. That's certainty. They were walking past a display about family constellations when Alan asked the question Mark had been dreading. Did you love Mama when you married her? Mark stopped walking. People flowed around them, but he barely noticed. Both boys watched him, waiting for an answer that mattered desperately. I loved her more than I thought it was possible to love another person, Mark said quietly. She was the best thing in my life. But I was young and scared, and I thought building a successful career mattered more than building a strong marriage. I thought I could have both without working at the marriage part. I was catastrophically wrong. Do you still love her? This from Alan, direct and hopeful. Mark looked at his sons, these incredible boys who were half Paula, half him, entirely themselves. The truth came easier than expected. I never stopped. I buried it under guilt and excuses and the work I used to avoid feeling anything. But it never went away. And seeing you two, seeing the life she built without me, I realize I didn't just walk away from her. I walked away from everything that mattered. Maybe it's not too late, Alan said with the optimism of childhood. Maybe it is, buddy. Your mother has every right to never forgive me. She doesn't hate you, Paul said, surprising Mark with his certainty. If she hated you, we wouldn't be here. She wouldn't cry when she thinks about you when she thinks we can't hear. She wouldn't have kept your wedding photo hidden in her closet behind her winter coats. Mark's vision blurred. She kept our wedding photo? I found it looking for my lost shoe. You both looked really happy in it. She was smiling bigger than I've ever seen her smile in real life. Mark had to turn away, pretending to study a display while he composed himself. His sons waited patiently, accustomed to emotional complexity from living with their mother. When Mark turned back, his face was wet. I destroyed the best thing I ever had, and I'd give anything, everything, to fix it. Then fix it, Alan said simply. Say sorry. Do better. That's what Mama always tells us when we mess up. It's not that simple with grown-ups. Why not? Paul challenged. You hurt her. You're sorry. You want another chance. That seems straightforward. What if she says no? Then you keep trying, Alan said with absolute conviction. That's what love means, right? Not giving up even when it's hard. Mark knelt down to eye level with his sons, these wise children who understood things he'd taken decades to learn. When did you two get so smart? We had an excellent teacher, Paul said. You should listen to her more often. The rest of the day passed in a blur of exhibits and conversations that felt important. Mark learned about Alan's dream of starting a band with his friends. He learned about Paul's fear of disappointing their mother, the weight he carried trying to be good enough for two parents. He learned about their lives in intimate detail, grateful and devastated in equal measure. When Mark dropped them home that evening, Paula was waiting on the porch. Both boys ran to her immediately, talking over each other. We crashed the simulator. Mark knows quantum physics. He used to play guitar but gave it up and regrets it. He still loves you, Mama. Alan's announcement, delivered with all the subtlety of a foghorn, made everyone freeze. Both boys clapped hands over their mouths, realizing they'd revealed a secret. Mark stood halfway up the driveway, mortified. Paula looked at him, her expression unreadable. Inside, boys, she said quietly. Wash up for dinner. They scurried inside, leaving Mark and Paula alone in the fading evening light. They told you that, Paula said. Not a question. Alan asked directly. I couldn't lie to them. What did you say? Mark walked closer, stopping at the bottom of her porch steps. The truth. That I never stopped loving you. That I buried it under guilt and stupidity. That I'd give anything to fix what I broke. You can't fix this. Too much damage. Too much time. I know. But maybe we could build something new, not fix the past, but create something different going forward, something better. For them? For all of us. Paula, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for possibility. The possibility that maybe someday you could trust me again, love me again, let me be part of this family you've built. Paula wrapped her arms around herself, and Mark watched emotions war across her face. Doubt, hope, fear, longing. I need time, she finally said. This is moving too fast, and I can't think clearly around you anymore. Take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere. That's what you said when we got married. The words landed like physical blows. I know, but I'm different now, or at least I'm trying desperately to be. Let me prove it. Paula nodded slowly. Okay, but Mark, this is your last chance. If you hurt them, if you hurt me again, there won't be another conversation. There won't be another opportunity. This is it. I understand. She turned to go inside, then paused at the door. They had a wonderful day today. Thank you for that. Thank you for letting me have it. Paula disappeared into her house, and Mark stood in her driveway feeling the weight of possibility and terror. In equal measure his sons had given him hope. His love for Paula burned brighter than ever. Now he just had to figure out how to deserve any of it. Chapter 9. The slow thaw nobody expected. 3 months passed like seasons changing, slowly imperceptible, then suddenly undeniable. Mark became a constant but never intrusive presence. He learned to read Paula's signals, understanding when she needed space and when she'd accept help. He showed up for Alan's school concert, sitting 3 rows behind Paula without presuming to join her. He attended Paul's science fair, where his son's project on aerodynamic resistance won first place, and Mark celebrated like it was a Nobel Prize. He learned their routines through observation, not invasion. Tuesday was taco night. Wednesday meant homework battles. Thursday was library day. He orbited these rhythms like a planet finding its path, present but not overwhelming. One Saturday morning, Paula's car died in her driveway. She was frantically calling mechanics when Mark appeared at her door, toolbox in hand. "Denise texted me, said you were stranded." Paula wanted to refuse on principle, but she had a major client presentation in an hour. "Fine, just the car, nothing else." Mark fixed it in 20 minutes. Loose battery cable and corroded terminals, nothing serious. When Paula tried to pay him, he refused. "This isn't about money. This is about being useful. Let me be useful to you." Something cracked in Paula's carefully maintained armor at those words. Mark Wood, who'd once valued his time by billable hours, was asking simply to be useful in her life. A week later, Alan came down with a brutal flu, high fever, miserable, crying at 3 a.m. Paula was exhausted from 2 sleepless nights, starting to feel sick herself, barely functional. Mark showed up at her door at dawn carrying soup, children's medicine, and an offer she couldn't quite believe. "Let me sit with him. Go sleep, please." "Mark, you don't have to." "I want to. I need to. Please, let me help." Paula was too exhausted to argue. She stumbled to her bedroom and collapsed immediately. When she woke 5 hours later, she found Mark in Alan's room, sitting in the rocking chair she'd used to nurse them as babies. Alan was sleeping peacefully, fever broken, and Mark was reading quietly, keeping watch. "You stayed," Paula whispered from the doorway. "Of course I stayed. He's my son." The simple statement undid something fundamental in Paula. Mark wasn't claiming fatherhood based on biology or obligation. He was claiming it through presence, through midnight vigils, through being there in unglamorous moments that defined parenthood. Paul had been observing all of this with his characteristic careful attention. One evening, he found Paula folding laundry in the living room. "Mama, can I ask you something serious?" "Always, baby." "Do you think people can really change? Not just pretend, actually change who they are at their core?" Paula set down the shirt she was folding, pulling Paul close. "What's making you think about this?" "Mark. He's been around for months. He hasn't missed anything important. He remembers stuff we tell him, even little stuff. He brings Alan guitar picks and brings me books about engineering. He fixed your car. He stayed up all night with Alan. He acts like a real father now." "And that bothers you?" "No, it confuses me. Because I want to stay angry at him for hurting you. But it's hard to stay mad at someone who keeps showing up, who keeps doing the right thing, who seems genuinely different." Paula smoothed Paul's hair back, choosing her words carefully. "People can change, but real change requires consistent work. It requires choosing to be better every single day, especially when it's hard. Mark's doing that work now. Whether it lasts, whether it's truly transformed him, only time will tell." "Do you think it's real?" "I think he's genuinely trying, and that's more than I ever expected from him." "Are you going to give him another chance, like a real chance?" The question Paula had been avoiding, asked directly by her perceptive son. "I don't know yet. It's terrifying to trust someone who destroyed you once. But you teach us to forgive people when they're really sorry and they change their behavior. Isn't that exactly what he's doing? When did you become so wise?" "I learned from you," Paul said simply, echoing his brother's earlier words. The following week, Paula was working late in her home office when her doorbell rang. She found Mark on her porch holding takeout bags, looking nervous. "I know it's Wednesday, usually homework night, but Denise said the boys are at her place for a sleepover, so I thought maybe you'd want dinner, just food, no expectations, no pressure." Paula should have said no, should have maintained her carefully constructed boundaries. Instead, she stepped aside and let him in. They ate Thai food at her kitchen table, and for the first time since the divorce, they talked, really talked. Not about the boys, not about logistics, but about themselves as people who'd once loved each other and might still. Mark told her about therapy, about unpacking his fear of becoming his father, about realizing he'd been running from ordinary life because he'd equated it with death, about understanding too late that the trap wasn't marriage, it was his own inability to appreciate what he had. Paula told him about the early days after the divorce, about being pregnant and terrified and determined to need nothing from him, about building her business because she had no other choice, about becoming strong because weakness wasn't an option when 2 lives depended on her. "I'm proud of you," Mark said quietly, "for who you became, for what you built. You're extraordinary, Paula. You always were, but I was too blind and self-absorbed to see it." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Compliment me like it erases what you did." "I'm not trying to erase anything, I'm just telling you truth I should have said when we were married. You deserved better than I gave you. And maybe, if I work hard enough, I can become what you deserved then." Paula pushed food around her plate. "Why now? Why are you trying so hard now?" "Because I finally grew up, because I realized too late what I had, because those boys gave me a reason to be better than I've been, and because you—" Mark's voice caught. "You deserved someone who would fight for you, and I didn't. I'm trying to become that person now, even though it's years too late." "You can't change the past by being different now." "No, but I can acknowledge the past and build toward a different future, if you'll let me try." Paula looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't seen in their marriage: humility, genuine remorse, growth earned through pain. "I don't know if I can trust you not to run when things get hard again. Then test me, make things hard, push me, see if I stay. That's not fair to either of us. Nothing about this is fair, but showing up anyway, that's what makes it worthwhile." They talked until midnight, not resolving anything, not fixing anything, but acknowledging everything. When Mark left, Paula stood in her doorway watching him walk to his car, her heart doing complicated gymnastics. He turned back halfway to his car. "Paula?" "Yes?" "I know you're not ready, but I need you to know I'm not going anywhere. However long it takes, I'll wait. I'll prove myself, because you're worth waiting for." He drove away, and Paula closed her door, leaning against it like she'd done months ago. But this time, the tears on her face weren't just grief and anger. They were something more complicated, something that felt dangerously, impossibly like hope. Denise found her like that an hour later, having dropped off the boys and come back. "You're falling for him again, aren't you?" Paula nodded miserably. "I don't want to. I've tried so hard not to. But Denise, he's different. Or I'm different. Or we're both different. And I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of believing in second chances, of trusting someone who broke me, of letting my guard down and discovering he hasn't really changed at all." "What does your gut tell you?" Paula thought about Mark sitting vigil with Alan, about him fixing her car without being asked, about the way he looked at her now, like she was precious, not a burden, like she was chosen, not settled for. "My gut says he's trying to be worthy of us, and that maybe if I'm brave enough, we could build something better than what we had before." "Then be brave," Denise said simply. "You've survived everything else. You can survive this too." Paula smiled through her tears. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best," Denise said, throwing Paula's own words back at her. Time moved forward, not erasing, not fixing, but building something new alongside the ruins of what had been. Mark didn't push for more than Paula offered, but he was there. In the morning, in the evening, in the moments between when life happened and choices had to be made. And slowly, carefully, Paula Flower began to believe that maybe some broken things could be mended. After all, Chapter 10, the reunion, nobody rushed. 6 more months passed, not dramatically, not quickly, but steadily, like roots growing deep. Mark showed up. That was the simplest and most profound truth. He showed up when Alan forgot his lunch and called from school panicking. He showed up when Paul needed help with a project that was due the next day. He showed up when Paula's business computer crashed during a crucial deadline and she was drowning. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't demand credit. He simply appeared, helped, and left when the crisis passed. The boys noticed. Denise noticed. Even Rita grudgingly admitted Mark Wood had become reliable, which from Rita was practically a declaration of sainthood Paula noticed most of all. One Sunday afternoon, she was attempting to build a treehouse the boys had been begging for. She'd bought materials, watched countless videos, but the pieces refused to cooperate. She was cursing at Wood when Mark appeared at her fence gate. "Need help?" Paula looked at him, then at the scattered lumber, then back at him. "Did Denise call you?" "She said you were building a treehouse and swearing at inanimate objects." Despite herself, Paula laughed. "Traitor." "So?" Paula stepped back, gesturing at the chaos. "Be my guest." They worked in comfortable silence, Mark measuring and cutting while Paula held pieces steady. The afternoon stretched warm and golden, filled with the sounds of hammering and the boys' laughter floating through windows. "Remember when we talked about building a house together?" Paula asked suddenly, Mark's hand stilled. "You wanted a big kitchen, I wanted a workshop. We picked out paint colors and argued about flooring. Then I threw it all away." Mark set down his hammer. "I'm sorry, Paula, for that and everything else." "I know you are." They finished the treehouse as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of fire. When they called the boys outside, Alan and Paul's faces lit up with pure joy. "Can we all go up?" Alan begged. "It's big enough," Paula confirmed. The four of them climbed into the treehouse, cramped and slightly crooked but solid. They sat in a circle, legs tangled, watching stars emerge through the leaves above. "This is perfect," Paul said quietly. Mark looked at Paula across their sons. "Thank you. For this. For everything." Paula didn't respond, but her expression softened in the dimming light. Months continued to unfold. Mark and Paula started having coffee after school drop-offs. Then coffee became lunch. Then lunch became dinner at restaurants where they'd once eaten when they were young and believed love was simple. They were dating, Paula realized with shock. Dating like people getting to know each other, building something new on foundations of the old. "Is Mark your boyfriend now?" Alan asked one morning with characteristic bluntness. "I don't know what he is." "He loves you," Paul stated matter-of-factly. "And you love him. We can tell." "It's complicated." "Why do adults make everything complicated?" Alan complained. "Because we have history mistakes to overcome." "But you're overcoming them, right?" Paul pressed. "You're trying?" "We're trying." "Then that's what matters." One evening, while the boys were at a friend's house, Mark appeared at Paula's door with daisies. Not roses or anything grand, just daisies, which had always been her favorite. "Come with me, trust me." Paula should have said no, but she found herself saying yes instead. They drove to Lombardi's, the restaurant where he'd proposed, where she'd made reservations the day he'd asked for the divorce. They hadn't been back since. "Why here?" Paula asked as they were seated. "Because this is where we started, where I asked you to marry me and you said yes. And I want to acknowledge what this place meant, what we meant to each other." "Mark, I'm not proposing. I'm not asking you to marry me again. I'm just asking you to remember that we were good once, that we loved each other truly. And maybe, if we're both willing to work at it, we could be good again. Different, but good." Paula felt tears threaten. "I'm still scared." "Me too." "What if you leave again?" "I won't. But I can't prove that with words, only with staying. Day after day, year after year, until you believe me." They ordered the same meals they'd eaten the night he proposed. They talked about everything, the past without flinching from pain, the future without making impossible promises. When Mark walked her to her door, he paused, looking at her with tenderness that hurt. "Can I kiss you?" Paula knew this was a line they couldn't uncross. Knew that kissing him meant truly trying, truly opening herself to him again. It would be safer to refuse. She kissed him instead. It wasn't like their first kiss or their wedding kiss. It was something entirely new, tentative, hopeful, real. When they pulled apart, both were crying. "I'm still scared," Paula whispered. "I know I'll prove myself worthy of your fear. Every day, I promise." Time moved forward. Mark didn't move in, didn't push for more than Paula offered. But he was there, mornings, evenings, moments between when life happened. They went to couples therapy together, unpacking baggage and rebuilding trust, brick by careful brick. They had hard conversations about boundaries and expectations. They learned each other again, differently this time, with eyes wide open. The boys watched their parents fall in love like adults, messy, complicated, beautiful in its imperfection. One morning, Paula woke to find Mark asleep on her couch. He'd come over late to fix a leaking pipe and fallen asleep watching television. She stood in her doorway watching him breathe and realized the fear had lessened, not disappeared, but become something she could carry. She loved him, still, again, always. When Mark's eyes opened and found her watching, he smiled, the real smile she remembered from when they were young. Morning. I love you, Paula. I'll love you better this time. I swear it. I know you will, because if you don't, I'll kill you myself. Mark laughed and Paula joined him, and somewhere in her kitchen, the coffee maker beeped that morning had arrived. They didn't rush into anything, no immediate moving in together, no quick remarriage. Instead, they dated properly, building something real on foundations of honesty and hard-won trust. The boys watched their parents choose each other daily and learned what healthy relationships looked like. Not perfect, but committed. Not without mistakes, but with grace for repair. Months later, Mark and Paula stood together while the boys played in their crooked treehouse, and Mark took her hand. "I don't deserve you or them, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to." Paula squeezed his hand back. "Good, because we're worth the effort." And in that moment, with her sons laughing above them and the man she'd loved and lost and loved again beside her, Paula Flower understood something profound. Some endings were really just difficult beginnings in disguise. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but possible. And for the first time in 7 years, Paula let herself believe that possible might be enough.